What's up, everybody? Couch Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Valorant video. And in this video, we're gonna be breaking down the 6 Valorant myths that will just absolutely ruin your rank. You see, there's a lot of things that people think about the game that are honestly incorrect or they're misleading. And if you take that with you into every single game, not only can it encourage you to play wrong, but it could be the reason that you just can't rank up altogether. But go to the GameLeap website right now, and the link's down below for in-depth advanced guides and VOD reviews over every single agent and weapon in the entire game of Valorant. So if you really want to better yourself, climb, we got everything you could possibly need down below. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, kicking it off with the first misconception that a lot of people have, and I really feel like this affects your gameplay in a way that is poor if you try to mold your entire playstyle around this myth, which is kills are all that matter. I think there's an unhealthy association between kills and doing well or doing what you're supposed to be doing. First off, kills are not the end-all be-all, especially when you're not playing a duelist-based character. Kills are ultimately a means to an end, and some kills are going to be far easier depending on how your team is setting up said kill, and some kills are going to be a lot harder if they're 50-50 aim duels when you're challenging them mid to window. I think a lot of people like to associate kills with worth, and when they don't have a ton of kills, they start kill seeking, which creates a feeding playstyle, and it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy where you go, you run in, you try to get these kills way too aggressively, and you completely neglect your role, where you're holding, how you're playing, and typically you feed as well. Oftentimes, the best thing that you could be doing if you're not getting a lot of kills and you feel like you could be doing better, maybe you're just racking up the deaths, you're feeding, and you want those kills because you just think you want to have more impact. A lot of times it's better, instead of going too aggressive, going and seeking those kills out, you need to resort back to a more fundamental play style, play more passive, play more based on your abilities and your teammates with team play and refragging. Don't just try to force through these kills over and over, because then you're actually just gonna end up feeding and it's gonna be a freaking mess, I promise you. Now we're going to the next big myth that could absolutely ruin your rank, and this has to do with playing duelists and generally playing with duelists, and it's the idea that duelist needs to alpha every single point. I've seen way too many VODs where someone has a duelist that doesn't just immediately push on the point and they're like, oh god, they're baiting me, I might as well go entry myself, and then they go push on and they die. Well, while yes, a duelist is supposed to be the first one on the point in entry, that doesn't mean that they need to be automatically pushing in. They often want to be baiting out abilities, gathering information, and finding optimal situations for them to execute onto site. It doesn't mean they're going to execute onto every single site, and often your duelist is not actually baiting you, they're just waiting for the appropriate point for them to go in. Now that's not always the case, and it's important to understand when that isn't the case and try to communicate with your duelist, be like, hey, go the fuck in, man, or whatever. You know, you could do it a little bit less toxic than that, but it is also important for you to not assume that they are doing their job incorrectly just because they are spending a little bit of time in default and they're doing all the things that I listed. Now the next big misconception that I think is a really huge one, and it's the idea of cheese strategies. People say, hey, oh damn, I just died to a freaking judge in short. That's a goddamn cheese strategy. And honestly, maybe it is, depending on your definition of what a cheese strategy is. But it's really important for you to understand that most cheese strategies are known as cheese strategies and not legitimately meta strategies, because once players get good enough, they actually purposely play around these things. You don't want to get killed to a freaking, you know, shorty in short. Maybe you should use abilities to clear out. Maybe you should wall bang. Or if you have better effective range guns and the enemy is really broke, maybe do your best to avoid a lot of these high risk areas where an enemy can get free value out of something like that. And then there's other strategies that people call quote unquote cheese strategies, like opping, which is legitimately not a cheese strategy. It's a legitimately high level strategy. While maybe at the lower ranks, people will complain all over the place about someone opping, at the higher ranks, it's your mistake if you die to an op. You need to be disciplined. You need to make sure that you're using utility, you're jiggle peeking correctly, and you're lurking in ways that can get you an off angle on the opper or cut them off through rotation. Understanding that there are ways to play around every single one of these quote unquote cheese strategies, and not just summing it up to, oh, they're just using this broken strategy, that's why I lost, there's nothing I could do about it, doesn't really identify the problem, doesn't take any accountability into the matter, even though you have all the ability to play around these things. And honestly, if it's working, then it's not really a cheat strategy, it's just a good one, am I right? Now the next myth is actually one about duelists again, but it really just applies to everyone, and it's the concept or the idea that duelists are the only ones that can carry. Now I'm not entirely sure why this myth started in the first place. I'm not entirely sure why people think that duelists are the only ones that really truly have impact. Maybe it's because they do have the most amount of impact, but it's really not as much as you necessarily think. You can carry on legitimately any role, especially the lower in rank you go. Maybe as you get to the higher ranks, you know, Immortal, Radiant, of course, duelists are gonna be a huge deciding factor. They're gonna have more of a deciding factor over their games. But in the vast majority of ranks, it means so little when you're talking about so many mistakes that you could just make less of than your peers. There are so many engagements that you can win simply with gunplay, smart ability use, and honestly, duelists, while they do have the most mechanical oriented, the most frag hungry oriented abilities, there are many ways to affect the game with the other characters that can just have a completely profound effect on your overall team fights. Maybe your duelists are the ones racking up the kills, but you're the one enabling them with your info, with your stalling abilities, with your powerful smokes. It's really important for you to understand that doing every single one of these ability-oriented things perfectly could be a huge way to carry without getting the kills, setting up your duelists, and one duelist could pop off in one game that you're in with them on their team, and they could just be doing trash when they don't have your level of support. But it's really hard to see that just looking at the KD, and I think overall a lot of people just really think that it's a coin flip. Oh, if I get good duelists, I win. If I get bad duelists, I lose, which is not even close to the case. So definitely keep all that in mind. Now the next big myth that absolutely destroys your rank, and it's the idea that you just got unlucky, that's why you died. You either get timinged, or maybe the enemy just really gets a random lucky headshot on you, no skill to them, and no fault of yours, they win that duel. You hear this way too much, I think, and it happens a lot where, especially when people get timing, they say, oh, if only I would have held this for a little bit longer, or, oh man, wow, they just got so lucky, I was holding that angle, and then they looked up through it right when I was looking away. Well, this does happen some percentage of the time, and there's some amount of time where you're legitimately getting unlucky, a lot, and I mean an overwhelming percentage of the time. It's really you not being disciplined with where an enemy could be, where they're likely to be, and making sure that when you are giving up information, you are keeping in mind the amount of time an enemy would take to route in that lack of information area. For instance, let's say you're holding mid for a certain amount of time, and you want to really quickly go and rotate to your teammates like A side, right? We're talking about Haven here. And you go leave for a second, you go help your allies, and the enemy back off, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna go back, and you run back to mid, and then you get killed, and you're like, what the hell? I was so unlucky. Well, guess what? Up mid, you did not clear. You have no idea if an enemy was there, and when you came back, you should have assumed that there was a possibility that an enemy lurked up. Because you weren't disciplined in the way that you retook the area that you left, you were not unlucky, you were not timinged, you were actually just making a mistake. And that's a really important distinction to make. I feel way too many people kind of relegate things to being unlucky or lucky when that has very little to do with it at all, honestly. Now moving on to the last Valorant myth that is the most important one to stop thinking, period. And it's the only reason that you lose is because of Smurfs and throwers. Now, I'm not gonna lie, there are definitely a lot of Smurfs in Valorant, and it's a problem that Riot is actively trying to create a solution for. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, they have created a situation where people want to Smurf to play with their friends, and towards the end of the competitive acts, people are honestly gonna Smurf quite a bit. However, they actually have stated that the amount of people that are legitimately Smurfing is between like 5 and 10%, which is really not that big in the grand scheme of things. I think far too many people actually think that a player on the enemy team that is doing well is automatically a Smurf, and they also think that if they're up against a Smurf, it's impossible for them to win, which are two things that are not even close to being true. First off, there are tons of times where people are just popping off and they're not a Smurf, they are just having a pretty good game. You've had those really good games yourself, and maybe enemies have thought you were a Smurf even when you're just playing really well that time. Everything's going well in your favor. Now, the next thing that you need to think about is the fact that you can beat Smurfs, and sometimes you're going up against those super Smurfs. And I'm talking about those Smurfs that are just crazy high in rank, You know, they're immortals, they're radiant, and you get those in your game. But honestly, that is not the vast majority of Smurfs. The vast majority of Smurfs are going to be smurfing like 1 to 2 ranks ahead of yours, honestly. And this makes them a Smurf, but they're not so far up there that they're impossible to beat. And Smurfs honestly lose all the damn time. Ultimately, what you need to understand is that every single player who has climbed from a low rank to a high rank has had to face many Smurfs and still, some percentage of the time, win. And on top of that, the amount of overall Smurfs you're really facing is honestly not that much. The other end of this is throwers, and yeah, sometimes you are gonna get throwers on your team, but honestly, that is completely random, and some percentage of the time, the enemy is gonna get a thrower on their team, so that's really nothing you can control, nor should it overall affect your win rate. But go to the GameLeap website down below right now for tons of high quality, in-depth VOD reviews over every single agent, so if you wanna know exactly what you need to do step by step in your games, the decisions you make, where to position, and everything, go check it out down below right now. But that's all I got for you today. Thanks so much for coming by. I love your freaking faces, and I'll see you next time.